Looks like it's slowing down, so looks like we have most everybody. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. First of all, again, I appreciate y'all's time today. Thanks for joining our Brush Management Redefined. My name is Benny Martinez. I'm the Market Development Specialist for the Southwest Territory or District in for Corteva. There's actually three of us in the U.S., and I'm proud to be able to serve as the Market Development Specialist in the Southwest. A couple of housekeeping things that I'm going to run through first of all, right off the bat, just to kind of set the stage for any questions. We're not going to be using the chat feature on this webinar. The chat feature actually should be disabled. If you have a question that you would like to have answered, we're going to ask you that you go to the Q&A function. Within the Q&A function, you'll be able to type your question in, and we're going to try to get to as many of those questions as we can towards the end of the presentation. If we happen to not get them answered live, we will get those answered via email or a phone call. So be looking for some messages if we don't get your specific question answered in the live presentation today. So again, thanks for being here today. We'll go ahead and kick things off with the agenda. I think it's always important for us to start with, what the whys. Why are you implementing a practice, regardless of what the practice is? So I've listed a couple of things as far as why we need to consider or why we think about controlling brush. I think there's a variety of different angles. I think there's a variety of different features and benefits. And I think just getting level-headed about, what those benefits are, I think is important. We'll talk about knowing the importance of your target. It's really, really critical that you know what you're dealing with, because it really dictates your best approach to managing that particular pest. In addition to that, it also helps you understand the basic functions of that plant or the basic trends of that plant in terms of reinfestations, regrowth, and what have you. So I think it's really important to know your target. We'll talk about timing dependencies, and we'll actually even spend a little bit of time talking about specific species. There's a calendar that I put together that has some common species that we can think about when we're making applications. We'll talk about methods of application. We'll discuss what I lumped together as some common recommendations for common brush species, particularly in the Southwest. We're going to finish things off with a talk about Sendero powered by Landvisor. I think a lot of y'all know a little bit about Landvisor, but for those that don't, we'll go through a refresher on that. That's something that has been launched for a number of years since 2020, but we have made some significant advancements from that time when we first introduced that tool. And then we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. So the first why control brush category that I listed here is the influence of livestock. So I think we're all familiar with the fact that forages are really our best, cheapest source of feed for our livestock. And so there's obviously some key benefits related to forage production and our ability to feed the animals that we're trying to raise. So that's obviously a no-brainer. Much of the rangeland that is suited for livestock is also susceptible to erosion because of a variety of different factors. It's pretty common. I started noticing this trend really early in my career that, we'd have farm fields close to areas that were pastures. And the reason why those areas were cultivated is that they were identified as areas that had better soils, better suited for cultivation and crop production. Well, unfortunately, what's left is areas that are very sensitive to erosion and other things that we need to keep in mind. Reinfestation of brush and unwanted species is another one. So that's just something that goes along with the fact that we're raising livestock in areas that are typically just more prone to having other issues. We often don't think about improvement to herd health, but that's certainly an aspect that we can think about, whether it's related to a plant-related illness or disorder, or it's because grazing pressure influences as it relates to parasite loads. Those are things that directly affect herd health, as well as general nutrition. Improve pasture utilization and grazing efficiency. We're living in days where we want to ensure that we're maximizing our potential in every way that we can. And obviously when we lose space within that acre, we lose that grazable acre opportunity, and it certainly costs us significantly when we do lose that opportunity to graze that area efficiently. Increased carrying capacity, obviously that's a key benefit. If we have a deteriorated landscape, we're not going to be able to carry the number of animal units that we have the potential to carry if we remove some brush. Improve forage health and response. Hopefully you've been able to get some rain here recently, but many of us haven't, and it's been pretty tough here the last couple of years. This drought's been pretty persistent. Typically we see forages respond much better when they're healthier, and health is directly correlated to brush control. Improved livestock handling. A lot of us don't think about implementing brush control programs and doing it in a way that helps us manage our livestock in terms of handling. But we really need to think about that, because that's a key feature and benefit to doing it, is if you can do it in a way that helps you move cattle across that pasture, it's going to make things a lot easier for you. So that's a major driver there, and why you maybe think about controlling brush. The second one that I've got here is a smaller list, but it has to do with wildlife. There are some benefits to wildlife as we think about controlling brush. One of them, and the most important one, is increasing biodiversity where we have monocultures. Sometimes we get into situations where it's one particular species, or it's a number of species, but the population of those species is crowded everything else out, and we've basically diminished the biodiversity on that landscape because of all that other additional woody plant competition. So there's a key opportunity there, and I'm going to show you a picture that really paints the picture for the opportunity to actually do that. Increased edge effect. The wildlife thrives on edge. That's a very common theme in the wildlife business, and you can certainly do that with brush management. You can sculpt, you can do strips, patterns, you can use randomized mots to create more edge. That's obviously beneficial from a wildlife perspective. Improved huntability and access. At the end of the day, if you've got a big stand of brush, you're not going to be able to see the animal. Yes, they may have some habitat there, but you're going to be limited in terms of how long you can see that animal. It's going to go into the brush and it's going to disappear. If you're hunting quail, well, obviously hunting quail in a big thick stand of mesquite is impossible. So there's obviously some benefits there. We've developed herbicides over the years that have become much more selective. So there's an opportunity to selectively control less desirable species and retain some of those desirable species that are beneficial from a wildlife standpoint. Improve nesting and fawning cover. Typically, when you do have a brush control project, it's going to stimulate a forage response, both of grass and weeds, or broadleaf weeds, and certainly that's adding to your ability to provide some nesting and fawning cover versus a deteriorated state. So this is a picture of a application that we made actually many years ago. This was actually a 2014 application that took place in LaSalle County. We just strictly ran with Sendero at 28 ounces at 4 GPA. The photo was taken on April the 9th, so not quite a year after treatment. But what I want to instill here is that we had a great response. We had good rainfall after the treatment. You can see in the picture there that we've got a great grass response, but we also had a great forb response. So you see a lot of forbs in the foreground there. A lot of that grass is plains bristle grass. So great grass. I consider it a very well balanced grass from a wildlife and a livestock production standpoint. So it's a really good grass to have. You can see the prickly pears fine. Obviously, Sendero by itself doesn't have activity on prickly pear. You can see some other mixed brush species that are surviving within that canopy. So we were able to preserve some of those species. Now, when I took this picture, I was actually on a 2-track road. So I was on a 2-track road looking at the treatment area. And then the next picture that I'm going to show you is actually a picture where I simply just turned around in the 2-track road and I took a picture of the untreated area. So pretty big difference between the two. Again, the rainfall was identical to the two scenarios. They were taken in the same exact day. All that's different is this is the treated area versus I turned around and the next picture is going to be the untreated area. So let's look at that picture. So kind of hard to believe that that's in the same pasture, but like I said, all I did is turn it around and took a picture of the area that was untreated. So what do we see? We see some grass, maybe not nearly as lush, pretty spindly, pretty small. We do see some forbs. They're also pretty small. Obviously there's a lot of canopy in there. If a white-tailed deer ran in there, we'd lose them pretty quick. If you reflect on the past picture, if a white-tailed deer moved into that brush, he would have some screening cover. He may feel comfortable with some of that screening cover, but we may still have the opportunity to see him. So, there's a huge benefit there. And then the other key thing here is, we've got a lot of bare soil here. Bare soil is not our friend. That soil heats up quite a bit. We end up heating it up so much that we lose soil microbes to the high heat conditions. And these plants can't withstand that higher temperature range. And so there's all kinds of reasons why we see the stark difference between the two. Obviously, this area still has a lot of competition. There's a lot of moisture that's being taken up. It's got very little sunlight that's making it into that lower layer, and so a lot of competition there that's really limiting our opportunity for any type of response. So I kind of finished on a key point, and that's that bare soil component. And so the last thing that I think about when I think about why control brush, I think about soil and water conservation. One of the first things that I think about is the reduction of soil erosion and water runoff. When we do get a rain, because we in today's time, with the weather pattern that we're in, we never know when we're going to get the next rainfall. We want that rain to percolate into the soil, make it into the soil and benefit us instead of running to the creek and running off. And there's some major benefits to that when we do brush control, because we're covering that soil, we're adding more soil structure, we're increasing that water infiltration rate, which is really big. We're banking that moisture instead of allowing it to run off. And that really translates to improved range health and resiliency. When a grass is stressed in this kind of this picture that you're seeing here, that grass is not going to be able to have the same amount of moisture that a grass that's in a better rangeland health environment have, and it's going to struggle to retain itself or retain its existence. It's going to have trouble, improving its energy bank and its root system, because it's going to spend most of its time just trying to make a little bit of growth. So big benefits there, and the next picture really, or next couple of slides really paint the picture to that correlation. So this is actually a rain simulator. For the folks that haven't seen a rain simulator, there's all kinds of demonstrations that you can actually Google. This just happens to be one that NRCS put together at a trade show. This actually came from a picture that I took in 2018 at the Texas Wildlife Association meeting. And in this picture, the demonstration itself, the rain simulator demonstration, what it does is it basically simulates a exact rainfall, a certain amount of rain that's put on this environment through a sweeping motion of a sprinkler, if you will, and it simulates what rain would look like exactly on this environment with a sloped area. Okay, so if you look at the picture on the left-hand side, you can see, some standing forage. You see a little bit of bare ground, but not much. And so this is, really a healthy environment. If you look at the picture on the right, the picture on the right illustrates two different canisters. Those canisters is what holds the water that was able to either run off or actually percolate through the soil profile. So what I want you to focus on is that front container. So that front container is actually completely empty. There's no water in it. There's no water in it because we had no runoff. Now there's a old sediment layer that kind of looks like there's something in it, but really there was no water that was in that front container. That's a good thing. We didn't run off any water. All that water that was simulated on this particular demonstration made it through the soil profile. So if you look at that back container actually has a water layer that looks to be about maybe 2/3 full. So that container is about 2/3 full. That's obviously really good. I like to imagine, or I like to consider that last bucket, that last container in the background as the bank. This is what you banked in terms of the moisture. And so, really good. We didn't lose any of it to run off, and we banked a considerable amount. If we look at the next picture actually demonstrates the same rain event, except on a deteriorated environment. So we've got a rock that's covered in some soil. We do have a forb that you can see there, and then we've got a prickly pear cactus. And so if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, you can see that the same rain event, the amount of water that actually ran off that particular environment was considerable. In fact, it filled the jug up almost to the very top. It's almost 100% full. The other thing that I want you to key in on is that there's a lot of soil that has actually ran off, indicated by that layering effect that you see on the very bottom of that container. So that bottom of that container is holding some topsoil that eroded from that site, and that's certainly something that we don't want. It takes a long time for us to replace an inch of topsoil. In fact, the numbers that I've heard over the years is roughly around 300 years. We're not going to replace that in our lifetime, so we want to preserve that. We want to keep that. We want to do everything that we can to not lose that. Now, here's the other thing: the back container. That container in the rear actually appears to have a layer there, but that's an old sediment layer. That container is actually empty. So we basically, in a sense, didn't bank anything, and we lost the majority of that rain event that actually occurred there. When we do get some rain, again, we want to try to capture that. We want to try to get that as best as possible. It's not, you can't claim a 2-inch rain event if you're not keeping it. If you're not banking it, what's the use of getting a 2-inch rain event? So a lot of correlations related to what that rangeland site looks like and our ability to allow that water to infiltrate through the soil. And again, the most important part is that we're not losing topsoil, when we have a healthier range environment. Okay, so we're going to switch gears, and now we're going to talk about the importance of knowing your target. So I've kind of broke it down into three main things. One of the things that I think is extremely important about knowing your target is the products that we use to treat that issue with. So, obviously we want an effective product that's effective on the target itself. But in addition to that, we want to ensure that it's labeled for that use. First of all, it's labeled for that site. It's labeled for that pest. It gives us that label gives us the flexibility to do the things that we need to do, and so those are important aspects as it relates to product specific attributes and specific targets. We don't want to treat a white brush, for example. We wouldn't want to treat it with Sendero because Sendero is not going to be effective on white brush. Spike is going to be effective on white brush. So knowing your target is extremely important. The other thing that's really important is how to treat. Individual species, they're all different at the end of the day. There's some that are going to be susceptible to foliar treatments, some that won't, some that may only be susceptible to a basal or a soil applied treatment. And there's actually a few species that are even difficult to control with a basal stem spray. So knowing your target, knowing what it's responsive to in terms of the method of application is really important. The last but not least is when to treat. There's certain times, especially on a foliar standpoint, that it's going to be really, really critical. In fact, anytime that you're spraying on a foliar basis, the timing of that application, especially when it comes to broadcast, is going to be really, really critical in order to get full control of that species. We're depending on that herbicide to translocate throughout that plant system, including the root system, to kill the root. And if we don't have the timing right for a foliar application, it's really, we're wasting a lot of our investment when we're not doing it at the right time. So I put in, what exactly are we killing? I put that because we have a lot of root sprouting plants in the Southwest. And I think it's oftentimes, we forget the intended target. Now, I put this picture up. This is actually a picture that I took of a mesquite tree that was actually attempted to be grubbed with an excavator. And that's one of the reasons why you see this funky root system. You see this funky root system because that excavator tried to grub that plant out, but the operator ineffectively pulled that plant completely out. So he tried to grub it, and then he retracted, and then he left it thinking that plant was completely grubbed. Well, that's the result. Now, the biggest thing that I want to show you here is that for root sprouting plants, there's an area of the root system that's called the basal bud zone, and this is what I'm pointing at here. Basically, it's from this, where the arrow is actually pointing, all the way up to where the soil line was. You can kind of see a darker color to that trunk where the soil line was. And so this whole entire area is where that plant is going to resprout if it's top killed. So if this operator actually cut it at the soil line, all these dormant buds would actually break dormancy and they would become a new plant. And so we've all seen it, mesquite trees that are mowed, whether they're on the roadside or in our pastures, the first thing that happens is it resprouts. And instead of having a single stem plant, we have a multi-stem plant. The reason why we have a multi-stem plant is because several of those buds that were dormant became active, and they became new parts of that plant. That plant is basically sensing that, it's had its top removed and it needs the top to continue to function. And so when we think about brush control, when we think about controlling root sprouting plants, we need to get it out of our heads that we're trying to control the top. It's obviously a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling that we get when we see a browned out top. But what we're actually after is that basal bud zone, to kill that basal bud zone so those buds don't return as a new plant later on down the road. So timing dependencies, foliar applications must be applied at the time when the specific plant is susceptible. Most perennial plants respond best to herbicide when the plant is actually sinking carbohydrates. And the reason for that is that the herbicide actually piggybacks with the carbohydrates as it's being translocated from the leaf down to the root. When we time those applications in that timing, the herbicide makes it down to the root and actually kills the root, versus the opposite when that plant is actually expending energy from its root system to fuel new growth. The carbohydrate flow is up, and when we spray a herbicide, then what happens is the herbicide gets pushed up. So I think we've seen scenarios where we spray a plant and it controls maybe a good portion of the top, but then it resprouts. It has a flag or several flags that flag out, and we wonder what could have happened. Most of what happened there is that we probably didn't have the timing right. Now there could be situations where maybe we didn't provide good coverage on that plant, but in most cases, when we do broadcast applications and we have effective coverage, the biggest culprit is that we had our timing wrong. Targeted control of the root system is key for long-lasting control at the end of the day. If we're not killing the root, we're basically putting a smaller band-aid on a big problem. It's going to help, but it's not going to really address our true needs in terms of full control. Okay, so I had mentioned that we've got a calendar that I had put together. This is just a basic calendar for a variety of different species. And so if you look at the very top there, it's got prickly pear and it has a very wide window of application. And in fact, it's probably a little wider than I put down. This is probably the preferred or optimum stages of when you want to spray prickly pear. But you can see that the window is wide, and it's going to vary some depending on where you're at. But it's fairly wide as it relates to some of these other species. When you look at honey mesquite compared to Western honey mesquite, it's actually a little bit different. Those two species are very different in terms of the way they respond to herbicides and the way they grow. And so even though they're both mesquites, they respond a little bit differently, and that timing window can shift one way or the other. But you can see that there's slightly different timings for those. Then you look at lotebush, McCartney rose, and locust. Those are a little earlier than the mesquite window. Why is that? Mostly because those plants don't have the extensive root system that mesquites have. Those mesquite plants, because they're very extensive root systems, they tend to grow a little bit longer, and it takes them a little longer for them to start synchronizing carbohydrates. And so those windows of opportunity for some of these other plants, can be a little earlier than mesquite. Then we look at what's under the August and September window. We look at Weesach, we look at blackbrush, we look at hog plum, and then we have McCartney rose in there again. McCartney rose is one of those species that actually has two windows of application, and so it's very possible that you can potentially target multiple species. But the key take-home message that I wanted to portray here is that not every species matches up on the timing all at one time. It can be somewhat difficult to get an application where you're actually targeting mesquite and lotebush together, because lotebush is going to mature its leaves much earlier in the season than maybe mesquite. And Weesach is very hard to time and all in the same time, because it really is best controlled in the fall. So there's times that we can control multiple species. But again, the take-home message here is that every species has its own window. So this is the general window of application for mesquite, and I say this. I use the term general very strongly here, because this can fluctuate quite a bit from year to year. This is just a general time frame. We often had heard, well, you want to target your applications on mesquite 42 to 63 days after bud break. That's a very general rule of thumb. I would say that Mother Nature is going to throw a twist in there, and it could be that you're spraying, maybe at 30 days after application. That's kind of a rarity. But if you have a warm winter and things take off much faster, and spring's warmer in general, that window could move up substantially earlier. Or if you have continuous cold fronts that are moving in the spring, and it could actually delay it some. So that window can shift some at the end of the day. what I want you to remember here is that the general window is all that it is. You've got two different windows of opportunity. You have that first window when that plant matures its leaves, and then you have the second window when you have bean elongation, which is typically 72 to 90 days. What happens in the middle is actually when bean elongation is actually taking place. So the flower is pollinated, it's starting to grow a bean, and it's elongating that bean, and there's a no application window opportunity there because that plant is utilizing carbohydrates from its root to fuel the growth of that bean as it's elongating on that plant. So diving into application methods. So we've got a variety of different tactics that we can use in terms of individual plant treatment. We can use a foliar application, which is very common. It's probably the easiest tactic to use. We're using a selective product, but it is dependent on timing. It's a very dependent application on timing because we are spraying the leaves and we're dependent on that carbohydrate flow. Typical spray equipment, consists of a 1 gallon pump up sprayer all the way to a 60 plus gallon UTV sprayer. It depends on the size and depends on the number of plants that you're trying to treat. And so you have a lot of flexibility there. We're mixing the herbicide with water. That it's a little easier to work with. But at the end of the day, timing dependency is one of those things that's a crucial component to that application. When we start talking about basal stem treatments, that gives us a lot of flexibility. Application sprayers tend to be much smaller. In that case, they tend to be in the 1 to 3 gallon sprayer tank sizes. They're best suited for smaller areas. Because you're working with diesel mixed with remedy, that diesel is just a harder product or solution that's harder on your equipment. So it does have some challenges related to equipment. You'll want to rinse that out, but it does offer a very wide window of applications. Really, there's only 2 times that I would not advise that you spray using the basal stem spray. One of them is when the soil is saturated, when it's completely wet. What often happens in that type of situation is that you have a waterlogged plant that's not really moving nutrients up and down. So that's one thing. The second thing is that a lot of times when we have a soil saturated environment, the water through the capillary effect moves up to the on the plant, on the trunk itself. And just think about it. We're spraying an oil-based solution on something that has water. And so basically it's repelling that herbicide and diesel, making it into that and penetrating into that barrier, into that bark, so that it controls the plant. And so really a time situation that we don't want to make an application. The second window that you don't want to use that technique is when you have a plant that's dormant. A plant that's dormant is just not moving nutrients up and down, similar to a waterlogged plant. And that's where we sometimes see a plant have reduced efficacy. Now, it's not to say that you can't get efficacy. It's that you're going to see about a 10 to 20% reduction in efficacy when you treat a plant that's in dormancy. And it depends on the plant as well. There are soil applied opportunities. It offers a great amount of flexibility. You'd love to get a soil applied product right before a rain event. That's obviously pretty hard to time, but it is a opportunity to treat different plants if the herbicide is effective for that particular situation. Now, when we talk about most of the soil applied type products, there is a soil type dependency. Most of the soil applied products, when you're dealing with a heavy clay or heavy or high organic matter soil, we tend to lose a lot of efficacy out of those type of products because that active ingredient binds to that clay or organic matter, and it makes it unavailable for the plant to absorb and take up through its roots. The end result is that we're not controlling that plant. The other thing that we need to keep in mind as it relates to soil applied products is there is a rate to size dose dependency. So the bigger the plant, the more product that we apply on the soil for a soil applied product. So there's some key take homes related to soil applied products that you want to keep in mind there. For foliar broadcast, as I mentioned, the broadcast applications timing is much more critical, even for IPT. If we're comparing a foliar treatment on an IPT basis versus a broadcast, the dependency for timing is much more critical because we're dependent on a very small amount of volume to cover those leaves, and we really need that plant to do the right thing, to be doing the right thing when we make that application. So those timings just tend to be a little bit more critical, whether it's ground or aerial application. Now, from a ground standpoint, we are limited to the size or the height of the boom. The height of the boom is really going to dictate what we could effectively cover in terms of that plant size. Once that plant gets too big, even though it's boom height, we may not be effectively getting good coverage on that plant. And so there is a very size dependency when we look at ground applications. They're probably better suited for small tracts. They do give you the opportunity to sculpt sometimes. Really, when I think about ground applications, I think more about maintenance opportunities. So maybe we're in a pasture and we're looking at that pasture and we see a lot of seedling mesquites that are coming up. Great time for you to make a broadcast ground application on that site to control those seedling mesquites before they become a bigger mesquite or a bigger problem. For aerial, fixed wing, helicopter, or drone applications, these are opportunities. There's really no size dependency there. You can spray as big of a plant as you'd like. There is a balance between the number of acres that you can treat with each one of them. Fixed wing are just moving much faster. They're covering more ground more efficiently, but they do have higher concerns with drift compared to a helicopter. A helicopter is much more agile, maneuverable, flies lower, slower. It's able to respond a little bit more to turning off and on. And so, there's some key differences there. Drones, I mean, there's no doubt that drones have a fit in the marketplace. Their ability to scope smaller areas, they have some really unique attributes. There's a lot to learn about drones, though. At the end of the day, some of the applicators that are out there are fresh into the business, and they're learning a lot as time goes on. So it's really important to get an applicator, no matter what, that is experienced and knows what he's doing and is really in tune with ensuring the success of your application. Suitable for large tracts based on the equipment. It is time effective. You can cover a lot more ground doing an aerial application than you can with a ground application in most cases. You do have an increased concern of drift because of your overall release height. You're releasing the product much higher than a ground piece of equipment. You're releasing it 10 feet above the canopy. If you have a 20-foot canopy, that means you're releasing the herbicide at 30 feet, and you're naturally going to get more lateral movement of that herbicide because of the overall release height. The range of scoping opportunity varies from one technique to the other as it relates to aerial application methods, but that's certainly something that you can consider in your decision making there. So I'm going to talk about a series of literature pieces that we have that's called the brush commanders. These brush commanders are selective to different species. These are really good guides. These guides actually go over when to spray, some of the key things that you want to look at, the types of equipment that you want to use, the amount of herbicide that you want to use in different tank sizes. So they're really, really handy guides, but they're selectively just for individual plant treatment. So this very first one that I'm going to show you is for mesquite. You can see that Sendero is the brand name that for the product that is the product of choice for mesquite control. As I mentioned, it talks about a series of things. I'm not going to go through every single one of those, but it talks about the method itself, application timing, the type of equipment, the process for mixing, as well as the process for spraying. In addition to that, it has this table that makes it really, really easy for the user, because all they have to do is look on this chart and say, okay, I've got a 3-gallon sprayer. And in this 3-gallon sprayer, what I need is 4 ounces of Sendero. I need an ounce of surfactant, and then I need 1 to 2 ounces of dye. And that's going to be your preferred mix for mesquite control. It's also going to have some important points to remember. So we talked about new growth being a stimulant of root energy that's getting utilized to fuel the production of these leaves. And so that's actually pointed out into some of these important points to remember. The backside of the guide actually has the basal stem spray. So same kind of format. You're going to look at all of the equipment, what to mix it with, when to spray, all that kind of good stuff. In addition to that, it's going to give you the breakdown for how much herbicide to the amount of diesel that you're going to want in the total solution. So all this is saying right here is that for a gallon of total solution, we're going to throw in a quart of remedy, and then we're going to fill the rest of that container up to the gallon mark with diesel. And so we'll have a total of 1 gallon solution. A quart of that is going to comprise of remedy, and then 75% of it is going to be made up of diesel. The next species that I'll talk about is honey locust. Honey locust, we do a very good job controlling honey locust with Duracor. So you can see again the same type of format. We talk about the equipment, the herbicide mixing, the spraying of the honey locust, and then we have the mixing ratios. So Duracor's recommendation for honey locust control is going to be 0.75%. That equates to an ounce per gallon. So you can see that the 3-gallon sprayer tank size is going to call for 3 ounces of Duracor, an ounce of surfactant. One thing that we forgot in this particular guide is the dye. We are getting that corrected, but at the end of the day, I always suggest that you use a dye at 0.25%. That's going to allow you to see what you've sprayed, not only the individual plant, but it's also going to show you maybe what leaves you may have missed on that plant itself. And so again, when we're talking about root sprouting plants, it's critical that we spray every single leaf to the point of where it's glistening. And so a dye, although it's sometimes can be a pain in the rear to use, it's just a good product to use so that we're not over applying and we're not missing anything at the end of the day. Last but not least, it's got some important points as it relates to honey locust. Prickly pear is another one that we've got. Same format here. The equipment, how to mix it, when to spray, as well as the product to use. In this particular case, we recommend for an individual plant treatment a 1% solution of Mesiview. That's 4 ounces of Mesiview in a 3-gallon sprayer, an ounce of surfactant, and 1 to 2 ounces of dye. Now, Mesiview is a restricted use product, so if you turn this guide over, you're going to actually see the recommendations for a non-restricted option, which is PastureGuard HL. I know not everybody has a herbicide license. Not everybody wants a herbicide license. I wish I didn't have mine. I actually have 2 that I have to maintain, and they're a pain. But at the end of the day, we do have a solution that offers you the flexibility to control prickly pear without a license. By the way, Duracor is a non-restricted use, general use product that you can buy without a license as well. Okay, last but not least, I have tallow, and because you know the general format, I'm just going to show you what the recommendation is. Duracor at 0.75%. That's an ounce per gallon, so 3 ounces in a 3-gallon sprayer, ounce of surfactant, and 1 to 2 ounces of dye is the recommended rate for tallow tree control if you're spot spraying, doing the leaf spray method on tallows. When it comes to cut stumps, I think this is a very effective treatment, and it's a treatment that offers you a great level of flexibility because you can control that plant species without fear of it regrowing, and you don't have to worry about looking at that plant, every day until it finally decides to deteriorate. The other key thing about where I like to use this is if somebody has a hay pasture that they're trying to reclaim that has a lot of mesquites, this cut stump method is actually the best approach. You don't want to do a foliar application on a hay pasture because if you're planning on cutting that in a short period of time, you're going to work against what you're trying to achieve, and that's total root control. When you top remove that plant that's been foliarly treated, you're taking the herbicide away from that root system. By doing this method, you're cutting it, you're spraying it, you're basically done. It's a really good way to keep stuff, especially fence lines. If you're redoing fence lines, it's a great way to keep those fences clean and a lot and keeping them from growing up again. It's a pretty simple recommendation. This guide has all of the same things that we talked about earlier, in addition to the recommended rate range, which is the same as the basal stem spray, which is a quart or 25% remedy, 75% diesel recommendation. In addition, again, it has some important points to remember. One of the most important points that I'll go ahead and discuss is the need to spray the entire surface along with the sides of that plant that's been. If you have a hay meadow that has regrowth mesquite, you're probably going to have a plant that has 10 stems, and you need to individually treat every single one of those stems that's been cut. Otherwise, you won't control the whole entire root. This can be an effective treatment. I've done it myself, and it's a very effective way to kill those resprouting plants. But if you leave one of the sides of this untreated, this plant will come back. Even this big trunk right here. If we did not spray the stuff that's closest to us, that basal bud zone that's below the soil surface, right in that area, is going to actually regrow and come up as a new plant. And we don't want that. We've already spent time cutting it. We already spent time spraying part of it. We want to effectively spray that. Now, one of the things that often happens is that we maybe throw sawdust or dirt on top of that if we're cutting too low. Anything that's covering up that cambium layer or that cut stump surface, we want to clean off before we make that application, because if something's covering it up, we're going to limit the opportunity to cover that surface completely. Okay, now I know that was a lot of information. I know that it's difficult to remember everything, but what I want to show you here is that we do have a Southwest Rancher guide that has a lot of that critical, detailed information as it relates to what we just talked about. In addition to that, it has a lot of other species. So it has a lot of other brush species, but it also has a lot of other weed species that you may encounter in your pastures that maybe you'd like to some guidance on. So if you scan that QR code, what you're going to get is this particular guide. It's called the Southwest Rancher's Guide. And there's a really cool way that you can actually add that guide to your home screen so that when you're out in the pasture, you can actually just go to your smartphone. It does have to be an Apple device. Tap on that, and it's going to pull that full guide up where you'll have all of those recommendations. Once you scan that QR code, if you'll go to the box with the little arrow that points up, it'll give you the opportunity to share that. If you have the new iOS version, it's going to ask you to share that. You're going to share that, and then you're going to look and pull up on the screen, and you're going to look for a little box that has the little plus sign, and it's going to say "Add to Home Screen." When you tap on "Add to Home Screen," you'll get the opportunity to name that home tab, and it'll automatically appear on your phone 24/7 after you save that particular option to add to your home screen. So really good guide to have at the end of the day. If you happen to not get this, come visit us or take a picture of it, and you should be able to get that on your phone device at any time. Okay, so now I'm going to close us out with a discussion about LandVisor. I'm going to go through this pretty quick because I know we have about 10 minutes left. And so LandVisor is really a tool that's really given us a lot of flexibility. And it's really opened our eyes to mesquite control. We've been in the business since the 1940s, so mesquite control is not foreign to us. What has been foreign to us is all the little intricacies that can happen with mesquite control that we just really didn't understand until we developed Landvisor. So Landvisor is really a comprehensive tool. If you want to look at it this way, it's actually the most comprehensive tool that ensures that you're going to control or you're going to treat your mesquite where you're going to extract the most value and you're going to get the best result at the end of the day. It really empowers ranchers and landowners, managers to do a better job at their whole process as it relates to mesquite control. So we do have this planning phase where we actually have the opportunity to meet and share all the insight maps that we have. So we have brush density maps, we have soil specific maps, we have maps that integrate the two together so that it shows you where you might get the best return on investment from a treatment standpoint. That's really empowering for you to have those type of tools at your disposal. But the other thing that's really, really big is our monitoring aspect. Now, our monitoring aspect utilizes sophisticated satellite imagery and an advanced time series analysis tool that we developed personally. Corteva spent a lot of time and effort developing this time analysis tool that really hasn't been stagnant. We've actually continued to develop it today to make it sharper and better so that it performs to the best of its ability for the producer itself. It does come up with a prescriptive parameters that are specific to that specific property, which is very important. The way mesquite grows in South Texas, it doesn't grow the same way in New Mexico. And so we've got to look at it differently. We've got to look at the environmental factors that play a role. We have to look at the way that mesquite plant grows differently. And this system does that. In addition to that, we have this execution portion of the whole process that ensures that you're using an applicator that's been trained and has the good intentions of doing the job right, maximizing your return on investment because you're picking the right spot that's going to have a better effect. The opportunity to do habitat improvement. If you're looking at potentially excluding some other species, this tool offers you that flexibility to do that. And at the end of the day, improving rangeland health at the end of the day. So we've talked about a lot of this, but it's no different. Mesquite control is dependent on timing, herbicides, and application. We all know that those are key importance. We like to look at it as a three-legged stool. If you're missing one of them, you're not going to get control, or you're going to get partial control. And so those are things that we actually take care of with the Landvisor system. So when we look at timing, the timing perspective, we've already talked about, how the traditional recipe for mesquite control looks at all of these parameters. But it does take a professional with somebody that knows mesquite to be able to make decisions if you're not using Landvisor. Now, I've recently did a quick tabulation of how many mesquite acres I've scouted over my career, and it's upward to over 500,000 acres. Even towards here recently, I've been fooled. I've been fooled by what I see and what I think when a plant is ready. Landvisor's given me the ability to see things differently because it can see things that I just can't see with my eyes myself. And so this is a huge opportunity for us as we dial in these control barriers to the extent where with Landvisor, we can actually remote sensor all of the key functions that we're really looking for. Now, this particular slide that I'm showing right now illustrates a lot of the trial work that we did that went into the original, just the initial training of the time series tool. So we used 58 sites that we tested from 2017 to 2020 to build the tool. These were sites across the state. 58 sites is a lot of sites, a lot of different trials. And what we saw when we developed the tool is that when we follow the prescription, our achievement for control averaged around 80% control. But here's the really best feature about this is that our range of variability was very, very tight. So in comparison, when we look at this yellow bar is when it's outside of the prescription of what Landvisor is saying. Our average mortality was 40%. And in addition to that, our range of variability was quite wide. The result is that we had a 40-point increase in control and a increased consistency from 8.31% from 23.18%. So we've been able to redefine the parameters in a way that helps us achieve success. And so really, really good, phenomenal numbers. The blue bar, it's just a combination of the two. So it's really not one that you really want to pay too much attention to. The main thing is that when we follow the prescription, we have a higher level of opportunity for success. As I mentioned, the system goes through and looks at historical data. So it actually looks at multiple years of data of how mesquite grows in that particular environment. And it picks out these parameters by looking at that history. It's unique to that environment. It's unique to that environmental conditions, environmental conditions as it relates to soil, moisture, rain events, and what have you. Those are all key things that the system is looking for to try to develop these particular specific parameters that are specific to this site. In addition to looking at all of this, though, we do have one key thing that we still rely on, and that's the human element. We still rely on the human element to make a verification that everything's correct. And so we do use a trained observer to look at these sites to ensure that you're going to get success. So we're not only using the tool, we're actually using every tool in the toolbox, including Landvisor, to make a decision on when to spray. Now, these next couple of slides is actually going to illustrate how things can change from one year to the next. So this is the Landvisor system picking out the windows of opportunity or multiple years. In 2018, we actually had no window of application whatsoever. It was just a year where things didn't line up for us. There was no parameters that were met where we would have achieved a high level of success. When I looked at this for the very first time, I reflected on 2018 and I reflected on a number of treatments that didn't go as well as I thought they should have. And that all made sense to me at the end of the day. My eyes were telling me that it was ready to go, but there were certain parameters that I just couldn't see that Landvisor was telling us, or could have told us that the window was there. You look at 2019 and we have a narrow window. We look at 2020 and we had a wider window, and 21 was even wider. But in addition to that, if we look at these side by side from one year to the next, we can see how there's a shift in terms of the window of opportunity. As I mentioned earlier, the environmental conditions that we have over the winter, over the spring, soil moisture, dry conditions, all of those play a role on what these windows of opportunity are. And so we can't simply write something on the calendar and say, okay, 42 days at post bud break, because I guarantee you in 2021, we're much later than 42 days post bud break. This tool just simply gives us a better opportunity to refine that window. In addition to that, we utilize various maps, not just one map, but we use various maps to help us make good decisions about whether or not that site is ready to spray. Now, one of the old ways of doing things is we used common corridors to go look at mesquite and see how things were looking. This map just shows us that we can see every single object in that site and really understand how mesquite's doing across that pasture, instead of just specifically looking at that specific site that may be in a travel corridor. Maybe it's a sendero or something else. We're able to see every object, see what kind of condition it's in, and make a better decision about whether that site as a whole will respond to the treatment. So I know we're running really close on time. I'm going to cover herbicide. We have a variety of herbicide options. We have sendero by itself that gives you a level of selectivity, controlling mesquite and maybe leaving other desirable species. If you're trying to leave hackberries, or if you're trying to leave live oaks, sendero is a great option for that because it is selective for mesquite. You can mix in sendero and remedy to broaden the spectrum up. It is one that we recommend for multi-stem plants or Western honey mesquite. And then we have this Sendero Tordon option where you can target prickly pear and mesquite all at the same time. Application is obviously the critical mile. It's the final leg of the stool. We do have a certified system where we actually certify these land visor applicators. We don't allow anybody to do this. We do this intentionally because we want people to have a good experience and we want them to have a good job done at the end of the day. So we certify these guys, we train them, we talk to them on a regular basis. They're also held to a very strict guidelines as far as what they need to do for that application. In addition to that, we also request that they send us their as applied files so that we have a record of where they actually sprayed. It's always good to know where you want to spray, but it's also important to know where we spray at the end of the day. We do have a warranty that's tied to this. So the if you're using straight Sendero, we warranty the control rating at 70% 3 years after application. If you do decide to use some of these other treatments where we're incorporating Remedy or Tordon, we do guarantee a higher level of control, and that's 75% for 3 years. This means that it's no cost to you if that needs to be retreated. And I mean exactly that, no cost to you. If the producer has to respray, Corteva picks up the cost of the herbicide, the adjuvants, and the application. So there's no out-of-pocket expense. This is a no-brainer at the end of the day. You get state-of-the-art insights and monitoring. You ensure that you're getting a higher potential return on your investment, and you have that peace of mind that you're going to get with the. So I apologize for running a little long on this. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions. I really appreciate y'all being here today. I think I've got 2 questions on the board. So how about yucca control? Okay, so great question. We do have some options for yucca. From an IPT standpoint, if you downloaded the Rancher's Guide, there's actually a section in there for yucca control that describes all the parameters. But there's a couple of techniques that you can use. You can use an undiluted technique where you're squirting Remedy in the whirl, or you can use a Remedy diesel mixture. They both have their pros and cons. I encourage you to look at the Southwest Rancher Guide for additional details there. Second one is, do you recommend fixed wing over helicopter and vice versa? We actually had a trial where we actually had a helicopter and a fixed wing do an application. We didn't tell them that we were going to do them side by side. We did mortality estimates 2 years post-treatment. These were actually very good applicators. The control ratings were 1% difference between the two. So really from an efficacy standpoint, as long as it's an applicator that has been vetted and verified, like through the land visor system, there's really no difference. The key difference is that you're going to probably see less drift out of a helicopter because they're flying much slower. You're going to have less wind shear. And the other thing is that you're going to be able to sculpt a little bit more with a helicopter over a fixed wing. So looks like we got one more question in there. Let's see if I can scroll down to the. Okay, breast greenbrier mix. Boy, that's one that we continue to do some research on. I know we had some trials that we put out last year that looked pretty good, but nothing new to share from a greenbrier standpoint. What I can tell you right now, our best option, if you wanted to tank mix chaparral individual plant treatment, timing of the year would be pretty close. We're coming up to a full year application window here pretty soon. Most of what I've seen in the greenbrier down south is it's still growing a little bit. I definitely wait to let it grow as much foliage as it can, let it slow down from a growth standpoint, and then do a mixture of chaparral at 6.6 ounces per 100, and then a 1% solution of pasture guard HL. You'll want to spray the entire leaves, spray the stems as well. Just cover that plant as best as possible, and that is our current recommendation for a foliar application. There is another recommendation where you can do a basal stem spray. I don't recommend that one as much because it is a real big pain to try to basal stem spray every single greenbrier plant. So it's really, really hard to do. But that would be the 2 options that you have for greenbrier. Let's see if I have any more before I close this out. Looks like that concludes all of the questions. I really appreciate y'all being with us today. Be looking for maybe some communications later on in the fall of the year where we're going to be introducing some of our fall webinar series. So really appreciate your attendance. I hope you all have a great day and hope you all get some rain soon. Talk to you all later.